I've been a long-haul trucker for almost 15 years, and in that time, I've seen some weird things. But nothing compares to what happened to me on a deserted stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere. To this day, I still don't have a rational explanation for it. It was late October, about a year ago. I had a load to deliver across state lines, pushing through the night on a stretch of highway that cut through miles of dense forest. It was the kind of road where you don't see another car for miles, where the only company you have is the hum of the engine and the occasional road sign warning you about deer crossings. The night was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones even with the heater blasting. The highway was nearly pitch black except for the glow of my headlights. My only goal was to make it to the next truck stop about 50 miles ahead, get some gas, and take a break. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Up ahead, just beyond the reach of my high beams, was a figure standing on the side of the road. Just standing there, unmoving. I slowed down slightly, gripping the wheel, scanning the dark for details. As I got closer, I realized it was a woman. She looked wrong. Too thin, too tall, with hair that hung in tangled strands past her shoulders. She was wearing a pale dress that looked old, the kind you'd expect someone to be buried in. The strangest thing? She wasn't trying to flag me down. She just stood there, facing the road, as if she had been waiting for me. I wasn't about to stop. I've heard enough stories about people getting jumped or robbed by hitchhikers pulling off weird tricks. So I kept my eyes on the road and passed her by. But as I did, my radio crackled, like something was interfering with the signal. And then, clear as day, I heard a voice. "You should have stopped." My heart nearly stopped. I slammed the brakes and grabbed the radio, but all I got back was static. My CB was tuned to a frequency I always used, and I sure as hell hadn't touched it. But before I could even process what had just happened, something in my side mirror caught my eye. The woman was now in the middle of the road, directly behind my truck. I swear to you, there was no way she could have moved that fast. I had only looked away for a few seconds, but there she was, standing in the glow of my taillights, staring at me. And then she smiled. I don't know what kind of instinct took over, but I floored it. My rig roared as I sped forward, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My breath came in short, panicked gasps, and I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see her still standing there. But she was gone. For the next 30 minutes, I drove like hell, my eyes scanning the road, my hands trembling on the wheel. I didn't care about my logbook or how fast I was going. I just needed to reach the next truck stop. When I finally pulled in, I nearly jumped out of the cab, my legs feeling weak. The place was mostly empty, just another late-night stop on a lonely highway. I walked inside, still shaken, and grabbed a coffee to calm my nerves. That's when an older trucker sitting at the counter glanced up at me. He must have seen how pale I looked because he gave me a knowing nod. "You all right there, driver?" he asked. I hesitated before answering.
Yeah.
Just had a weird experience out on the road. He set his coffee down, eyes narrowing slightly. "Let me guess. You saw her." A chill ran down my spine. I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The old trucker leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Couple years back, a woman got hit on that highway. Driver didn't stop. No one found her until days later. They say she still waits out there, looking for a ride. And if you don't stop..." He let out a breath. "She follows." I didn't sleep much that night. I finished my delivery the next day, but I refused to take that highway back. Took the long way home, cost me a couple extra hours, but I didn't care. Since then, I've been on a lot of roads, seen a lot of things. But I've never gone back to that stretch of highway. And I never will. I had been driving for hours, trying to outrun the worst of the storm. The radio crackled with weather warnings, repeating the same message: blizzard conditions, zero visibility, travel highly discouraged. But I had no choice. I had to get home. It was just past midnight when I found myself on an isolated stretch of highway cutting through the mountains. The snow was coming down in thick sheets, swirling in the wind like a living thing. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, reflecting off the endless white that had buried the road. There were no other cars, no signs of life. Just me, the hum of the engine, and the storm. I was gripping the wheel tight, my knuckles white, when I saw something ahead. At first, I thought it was just a snowdrift, some misshapen lump half buried on the side of the road. But as I got closer, my stomach twisted. It wasn't snow. It was something else. It was hunched over, long limbs bent at unnatural angles, covered in matted, dirty white fur. The creature's head was lowered, its back to me, and for a moment, I thought it might be a wolf. But as my headlights washed over it, it moved. Not like an animal. Not like anything I'd ever seen before. Its head snapped up, and I saw its face, or what should have been a face. There was no snout, no fur there at all. Just pale, stretched skin over a bony structure, hollow black eyes that caught the light in an unnatural way, and a mouth that stretched too wide, filled with jagged, uneven teeth. I slammed on the brakes. The creature twitched like it was waking up from some deep sleep. Then, with an unsettling fluidity, it stood up. It was tall, too tall, at least 7 feet, its limbs spindly but eerily strong. And then it did something I will never forget. It smiled at me, not like an animal baring its teeth, not even like a person. It was deliberate, malicious. Its lips curled back, revealing those impossibly sharp teeth, and it tilted its head, like it was amused. I threw the car into reverse, my tires spinning against the icy pavement, but before I could move, the thing took a step toward me. Then another. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet whose strings were being pulled by something that didn't quite understand how a body was supposed to work. That was when I realized something else. It wasn't leaving tracks in the snow. The weight of my car had left deep grooves. My own footprints from when I'd checked the tires earlier were still visible. But this thing? Nothing. Not even a hint of disturbance in the powdery white. I was gripping the gear shift so hard my fingers hurt. My breathing was shallow, my chest tight. Every instinct in me screamed to get out of there. Then it moved faster. 1 second it was several feet away, the next it was at my hood. I let out a strangled scream and slammed the car into drive, my foot smashing the gas pedal. The tire skidded, the back fishtailed on the ice, but I didn't care. I didn't look back. The last thing I saw before I sped away was its hand, long, clawed fingers slapping onto my windshield, leaving behind streaks of something dark and frozen. I drove like a madman, the storm swallowing the road behind me. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, expecting to see those hollow black eyes staring back at me, but there was nothing. Just swirling snow and darkness. It took me another 2 hours to reach the next town, the first bit of civilization I'd seen since before the storm hit. I pulled into a gas station and sat there, shaking, breathless, staring at the frozen streaks still clinging to my windshield. The attendant must have noticed, because he walked over and knocked on my window. "Hey man," he said. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I wanted to tell him. I wanted to warn him. But what could I say? That I'd seen something impossible? That I'd nearly died on a road where nothing should have been? Instead, I just nodded. "Yeah, I lied. Just the storm." He frowned but didn't press. "Lucky you made it through," he said. "People go missing up in those mountains every year. Search teams never find them." That night, I scrubbed at the marks on my windshield until my fingers were raw. But no matter how much I cleaned, I could still see them. Dark streaks, frozen in place. Proof that something had been there. Something that smiled at me in the snow. I had been driving for hours down a desolate highway, the kind that stretches endlessly with nothing but darkness pressing in on both sides. The GPS had lost signal miles ago, and the last sign of civilization was a gas station I had passed nearly an hour back. My phone's battery was hanging on by a thread, and the radio was nothing but static. I wasn't supposed to be out this late, but I had taken a wrong turn somewhere, and now I was stuck in the middle of nowhere with only my headlights cutting through the night. Every few minutes, I'd check my rearview mirror, half expecting to see another pair of headlights, but there was nothing. Just me, the road, and the eerie silence of the world outside my car. Then it happened. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. A flicker of light in the sky, barely noticeable against the black expanse above. But then it happened again, a quick streak that shot across the sky and vanished just as fast. A shooting star? Maybe. I tried to shake it off, but something about it unsettled me. It wasn't just the way it moved. It was how close it seemed, almost too close, like it wasn't far away in the atmosphere, but hovering, watching. Then my radio crackled. I jumped, my heart hammering in my chest. The static had been constant for the past hour, but now there was something beneath it. Faint, almost like a whisper. A distorted voice? A signal trying to break through? I turned the knob, but it didn't help. The whispering grew louder, still unintelligible but pressing against my ears, filling the car with an unnatural hum. My fingers tightened around the wheel, and an uneasy feeling crawled up my spine. That's when the lights appeared. Not in the sky. On the road. Ahead of me, a bright, pulsating glow emerged out of nowhere, floating just above the asphalt. It wasn't headlights, there was no car, no taillights, no sign of another vehicle.
Just this thing.
Hovering. I slammed on the brakes, my tires screeching as my car skidded to a stop just a few yards away. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The light was blinding, but there was no source, no structure, no shape. Just raw, pulsating energy radiating in a color I couldn't quite describe, almost blue, almost white, shifting and twisting like liquid. Then the car died. Everything. The engine cut out. The dashboard lights flickered and died. Even my phone, which had been clinging to its last percentage, suddenly shut off. The air inside the car became heavy, thick, like something was pressing down on my chest. Then the voice came.
Not from the radio this time.
From inside my head. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Not words exactly, but thoughts being planted directly into my mind. A voice that didn't speak, but resonated. Do not move. I couldn't even breathe. I felt paralyzed, frozen in place as a figure began to emerge from the light. At first, I thought it was human. The silhouette was humanoid, tall, slender, moving with an unnatural grace. But as it stepped forward, I saw the truth. Its skin was smooth and reflective, like liquid metal shifting over its body. Its eyes, or what I thought were eyes, were not eyes at all, but voids, black and endless, drawing me in. I tried to move, tried to run, but my body wasn't my own anymore. I was locked in place, trapped in some invisible force holding me still. You are not supposed to be here. The words, no, the thoughts, echoed through my mind. I wanted to scream, to ask what it meant, but my mouth wouldn't work. I could only stare as the figure reached out toward me, its elongated fingers stretching through the light. Then everything went black. I woke up to the sound of my car's engine humming softly, my headlights illuminating an empty road ahead. I gasped for air, my heart racing as I gripped the wheel. My phone was back on, my dashboard lights glowing as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew something had. I checked the time. 3 hours had passed. I didn't remember driving. Didn't remember anything after the figure reached for me. But I wasn't in the same spot. My car was parked neatly on the side of the road, like someone had pulled me over and left me there. I looked around, searching for any sign of whatever had happened. But there was nothing. Nothing except a single, faint burn mark on the road where the light had been. And a voice still echoing in my mind. I was about 3 hours into my overnight drive, cutting through long stretches of empty road, the kind where the only company you have is the occasional road sign and the glow of your headlights on cracked asphalt. I was heading west, trying to make it to my cousin's place by morning. It wasn't my first long haul at night, and I had always preferred driving this way. No traffic, no distractions, just me and the road. It was sometime past midnight when I first saw him. A figure standing on the side of the highway, arm outstretched, thumb up. I wasn't the kind of guy to pick up hitchhikers, especially not in the dead of night, but something about this one caught my eye. He was dressed oddly, wearing what looked like a dark coat over some kind of old-fashioned white shirt. His face was long and gaunt, barely visible under the brim of his hat. For a split second, I debated driving past, but at the last moment, something made me slow down. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe just curiosity. Either way, I found myself pulling over, watching in my rearview mirror as he walked toward the passenger side. The moment he opened the door, I regretted stopping. His smell hit me first, an earthy, stale odor mixed with something metallic. It was the kind of scent that reminded me of old churches or damp basements, like something that had been buried for too long. "Thank you, kind sir," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "God bless you for your kindness." I gave him a quick nod and forced a half smile. "No problem. Where you headed?" "Wherever the Lord takes me," he said, sliding into the seat and shutting the door. That answer didn't sit well with me. Most hitchhikers had a destination, but this guy sounded like he was just wandering. I pulled back onto the road, gripping the wheel a little tighter. For the first few minutes, we sat in silence. I tried to focus on driving, but I could feel his eyes on me, like he was studying me. The air in the car felt heavier, and the further we drove, the more uncomfortable I got. "You believe in him, don't you?" he asked suddenly. It took me a second to realize he was talking to me. Yeah," I answered hesitantly, not wanting to start a whole religious conversation in the middle of nowhere. "You a good man?" he pressed. I let out a small, uneasy chuckle. "I try to be." He nodded slowly, almost as if he was considering something. Then, without warning, he started whispering under his breath. At first, I thought he was praying, but as I listened closer, I realized it wasn't any prayer I had ever heard. It was a chant, low and rhythmic. I cleared my throat. "You okay, man?" He didn't answer. I glanced over at him, and for the first time, I saw his hands. His fingers were long, bony, and covered in strange markings, symbols carved into his skin, deep and raw. They looked like they had been done with something sharp, like a knife. What happened to your hands?" I asked, my voice uneasy. He turned his head slowly, his face completely void of emotion. "I have been chosen," he whispered, "marked by the Lord." I swallowed hard and turned my eyes back to the road. "That's so." "He speaks to me," the man continued. "He shows me the wicked, the ones who have turned away, the ones who need to be cleansed." My grip on the wheel tightened. You mean like bad people?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled something out. I felt my stomach drop as I saw the gleam of metal in the dim glow of the dashboard. A knife. Not just any knife. A long, rusted blade, covered in what looked like dried blood. I felt my pulse hammer in my ears. "I don't know if you're a good man," he said, his voice calm, almost thoughtful. "But I suppose we'll find out soon enough." I forced a dry laugh, trying to keep my voice steady. "Look, man, I think this is where your ride ends. I'll pull over, and..." Before I could finish, he pressed the blade against my arm. "Keep driving," he murmured. My throat tightened, my mind racing for a way out. The highway stretched endlessly in front of me. No exits, no signs of life. "You know," he continued, his voice taking on a feverish edge, "the world is full of sinners. People who pretend to be good, but carry darkness in their hearts. You ever think about that? You ever think about how many liars and thieves walk among us?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah, sure, man. You ever kill a man?" His voice was almost hopeful. I felt a cold sweat break across my skin. "No." He smiled, his teeth yellow and uneven. "Pity." The seconds stretched into minutes, the blade still pressed against my arm, the man muttering under his breath about fire and judgment, about cleansing and sacrifice. I knew I had to do something before he decided I was one of the people who needed to be cleansed. Then up ahead I saw them. Headlights. A gas station. I had never been so relieved in my life. I forced a nervous chuckle. "Hey, how about I pull in there and grab us something to drink?" His grip on the knife tightened. No stops. "Come on, man," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Even God's chosen need a break, right?" He hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the station. I saw his fingers loosen ever so slightly on the knife. That was all I needed. I slammed my foot on the brakes. The sudden stop jerked him forward, and in the split second of his surprise, I shoved the gear into park, threw open my door, and bolted. I heard him scream behind me, felt the rush of air as he lunged after me, but I was faster. I ran straight toward the gas station, bursting through the doors, panting and shaking. The attendant looked up, startled. "You okay, man?" I turned, half expecting to see the hitchhiker right behind me. But he wasn't. The passenger door was open. The knife was lying on the seat, and he was gone. The police searched the area, but they never found him. No footprints, no sign of where he went. They ran his description but came up with nothing. It was like he had never existed. I don't know who or what he was. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving alone, I swear I still hear that whisper in my head.